when the king was elected the first time around, the self-declared king, I was in
The wisdom of this edition of Democratic Visions is generated by author storyteller Loren Niemi and legendary media snark Mike Gelfand.
And it used to be the newspapers would say, well, F off, but not these days.
Howard Lieberman reluctantly had to bail out of this episode. I reluctantly sat in for Howard. Gelfand begins the half hour.
Well, I don't know about you, Loren and Jeff, but I'm pretty comfortable here today. We got 3 old white men. There's no DEI anymore.
Okay.
And we can just sit here and grumble and groan and talk about how just what a bad break we're getting.
Well, I'm here to take notes on what you two guys do. And,
As well you should.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Bad break? What constitutes a bad break? you know?
Look, here's the thing. Most of us are losers in life, right? We ascribe to the big hit.
Yeah.
Maybe we want to be homecoming king and queen, and we want to be the quarterback, and none of this stuff ever happens.
Yeah, never did, no.
So, I think you have to settle to some extent. But do we have to settle for what's going on right now?
No, I don't think we have to, and we shouldn't. How about?
Well, no, you shouldn't, I think, is the proper phrase. So yeah.
Yeah.
When the king was elected the first time around, the self-declared king, I was in Chicago, and I had occasion to tell a little story, which was that a guy is walking down the road, and he sees a snake, and the snake is half dead, so he picks it up, and his compassion requires him to put it in his pocket to warm the snake up. And as the snake begins to warm up, it begins to move around, and the guy looks and he says, "You okay?" And the snake goes, "Oh yeah, much better, much better." And then pretty soon the snake is feeling it's back to its own self. So it bites him. And the guy says, "How can you bite me after that kindness?" And the snake says, "You knew I was a snake when you put me in your pocket."
Yeah, I guess a lot of us knew the snakes we were going to see as presidents, and not just the president, but the neo-president.
Yeah.
Right.
And they said it. They told us they were going to destroy democracy. I don't know if we didn't believe it. I think a lot of people. I think the worst thing that's happening all around the world, and certainly in this country, is willful ignorance. Willful ignorance is a terrible, terrible thing.
Well, what do you mean by willful ignorance?
I mean, these are people who, if they get any news at all, they get it from Instagram, QAnon, Fox News, but
There is no distinction between fact and what we wish were facts.
right.
There is no distinction between should, could, and would.
Well, some people say that, we have an alternate truth.
Right.
We have an alternate set of facts. Now, what does this mean?
Yeah, well, that of course.
That goes back to willful ignorance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's much more comfortable to believe things that aren't true, and these people who go to the polls. I'll give you an idea. I was in an Uber shortly before the election. The driver was a Russian immigrant. And so naturally I talked politics with him. I wanted to know his perspective from someone who did not necessarily grow up with democracy. And I said, "So who are you voting for?" And I knew this guy. I'd been in his truck or his car before. And he said, "I'm a Trump guy." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Well, all I care about is the economy." And he said, "So I think Trump would be the right guy because, he was such a successful businessman." And I pointed out very kindly that Trump had filed for bankruptcy 6 times. And his reaction was, "What?"
Yeah. His way of doing things was well known in New York in the 1980s when I lived there. He always had enough money for really good firm of attorneys to back him up and to stall things and to push it back and to find some minutiae
Yeah.
in the law that would, free him up. And it happened during his first administration.
Right. Well, it's worse now because he realized that he could have gotten away with so much more.
Yeah. Well, now he's hired lackeys to be part of his. I mean, his first regime, he hired people who kind of knew how to do things.
Yeah.
And had
because he knew how to do nothing.
Yeah.
He still knows how to do nothing, but now he's not, says it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well,
Now, what about the Tesla guy? What's your take on him? Do you drive a Tesla?
Oh, of course not.
No.
Of course not.
How about you, Mike?
Even if I didn't find him reprehensible, I wouldn't drive a Tesla.
Okay.
well, I have a 26-year-old Camry.
Oh, good.
But I don't drive it anymore. But
You don't, okay.
But it's sitting in my garage.
Kind of a trophy car in your garage?
Well, I think as it ages now, I think it increases in value.
Okay.
And this car has little distinctions that the original one didn't have. Like I've got a very bold blue tape around many of the things that fell off the car.
Okay.
Yeah. You can do a lot with duct tape. So I think this car is going to go for more than a couple $100.
Great. Loren, what do you ride?
I'm driving at this point, a 12-year-old Volvo.
Wow.
So, which I bought from a friend of mine. When they were going to move up to a Ford Explorer. So it was like.
Oh. Yeah. Well, you have one of those cars.
I have a Honda Fit.
You've got warmed up seats to sit in, right?
Well, that's my wife's car.
Oh, that's your wife's
Yeah,
car. Okay, yeah.
So
I have warmed up seats, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't.
Well-
But warm up seats make me feel like I have bowel problems, and so I.
Yeah. Well, I have a warmed up seat, but I'm warming up the seat.
Okay. Good. Yeah. Well.
And that's what I thought they meant,
So you talk about uber political discussions you've had.
Mm-hmm.
What political discussions have you had recently in your world?
When I think about the election, I think about how quickly things turned. So right before the election, I was at a conference in Kentucky. I flew into Columbus, Ohio. I went to get my rental car, which was supposed to be a Camry, but instead they gave me a Jeep Grand Cherokee, which was so damn big I could barely see the edge of the road.
My car, incidentally, could fit inside it.
Right, exactly. And I couldn't figure out how the radio worked. So I'm listening to what is in fact the black radio station as I'm leaving Columbus, and they are clearly for Kamala. And they're talking about what a terrible disaster Trump will be for the black community.
Yeah.
And then as I get down to Kentucky, you begin to see Trump signs. But by the time I get to Kentucky, they disappear because everyone's in agreement. We don't need to.
That's right.
We don't need to say that.
Yeah.
Right. So the week after the election, I was in Michigan, in Howell, Michigan, for a conference, a festival, and I wake up in the morning and my hostess is looking out the window and I go, "What's the matter?" She says, "Oh, the Nazis are across the street." And we go and we look, and indeed, there are Nazis across the street. And I go, "What's that?" And she says, "Oh, that's the county courthouse." I go, "Well, what's happening that the Nazis are there?" She says, "I have no idea." The same day, though, the same Nazis or other Nazis went the next town over to protest the Diary of Anne Frank at the American Legion.
What?
And I just saw this last week that the Nazis were back in Howell protesting the Diary of Anne Frank in Howell. And it's like, in the space of a week, the sense of permission to just be rude, to just be blatantly discriminatory, to let your little flag of disrespect and uncompassion fly was pretty shocking to me.
Well, now we have now Bobby Jr., who has said,
Robert Kennedy Jr.
Whatever. Yeah.
Head of the Department of Health or
Health and Human Services.
Yeah.
Health and Human.
But he's the guy who said that the Jews during World War II, the Jews who were captors, whatever, had it better than people who were forced to take vaccines. Because he said, after all you had to do was climb over the Alps, find a closet to hide in, and look at Anne Frank. She did just fine. Well, of course, she was actually exterminated by the Nazis.
Yes.
So Bobby Jr. leaves a few things out.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, it's Bobby Jr. Now we have people who well, let's go with the neo president,
Okay.
Musk.
Yeah.
This is a guy who got very excited. He's an excitable guy, you know. He says he has Asperger's, and sometimes he just has these involuntary movements. One of them, of course, being Heil Hitler. No, I mean, and then people say, oh, he didn't mean anything by that.
Yeah.
It was just a twitch, you know.
It means something, man. I'll
Yeah.
tell you, yeah.
It's like it was like he had tardive dyskinesia, you know, where you have these involuntary movements. In this case, it's tardive kinesia Nazism. But either way, and these are people who are telling us what to do now. These are it's just crazy. Trump wants his face on Mount Rushmore.
He actually said that now.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
he said that during the first.
He said it during the
the
first
first
time.
turn, right?
So now he thinks maybe this is the time for it. But he doesn't want just that. He wants to eradicate the other faces, right?
Has he said that?
We hints at it. Okay, maybe I'm making that up. But,
well,
it's what he would want.
It's reasonable that he would do that.
And he doesn't
yeah.
want it to be called Mount Rushmore because people who don't like him would call it Mount Mushroom.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's I mean that's what we're dealing with here, right?
That reference was pretty obscure, but I loved it.
I did too. Yeah.
Oh man.
Oh man.
Yeah. Musk was. I read about this. I saw it on one of the lesser read. It wasn't quite Q Chan, Channel Q, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Q Chan. It was something more like Jew Chan, which is what I subscribe to, and they were talking about the great Valentine's Day and President's Day that Musk had. He's Valentine's Day because the guy got his I think he had 5 baby mamas now. I believe so, and most of them are either twins or triplets, which gives you respect for the guy because he does everything efficiently. Why they're coming out 2 and 3 at a time.
Yeah, but he's terrible at naming them. They just have bad names.
Well, who could remember that?
What are they?
Well, one of them is named X.
Well, that was the easiest one.
Right, that was the last one of the later ones.
X?
Yeah.
Really?
X, yeah.
Well, that was almost like a name.
Right,
But a lot of them are like EA plus, equal.
right, yeah.
Yeah, no, because he doesn't have any sense. I don't think he has any sense of humanity.
Well, there's one thing in common a lot of the Orange Menace's cabinet has and that he's chosen. They're kind of like him. They're dysfunctional
Yeah,
in a big way,
yeah,
and they overcompensate in ways that can be dangerous.
yeah. Oh yeah, I mean you just go down the line, like the defense secretary, Heggie, our own Minnesota's own Heggie.
Yeah.
This is a guy who said that if he got the job, he'd quit drinking. I mean,
It's not going to happen.
How about you? How about any of us apply for a job? Like, oh yeah, I'd love to work for your newspaper, and if I get the job, I'm going to stop drinking. I don't think most of us would find this as a quality they found, like you want in an employee.
But you can understand why Trump would hire a guy like that.
Well, sure, yeah.
I mean, the first criteria is loyalty, and the second criteria is that you're telegenic. You look good in front of the camera.
Sure.
Every one of those people,
Oh yeah.
has a certain kind of, easy to look at when they say terrible things.
Pam Bondi. Pam Bondi's a classic example.
Who's she?
She's what is she head of the?
She's the Attorney General.
Attorney General, yeah.
Okay.
And she got the job because she basically took a bribe from Trump once and got him off of something.
Yeah.
And but he would not have hired her if she had actual blonde hair. But she doesn't. She's got dyed blonde hair, and that's the kind of thing a guy like Trump wants.
Yeah.
He wants something that looks great, but is completely artificial.
Well, considering his own
Yes. The crown.
The crown, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Phony all the way. There's nothing about the guy that's real.
In the world of storytellers, what are you hearing about the current administration?
Well, what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of people who are very, very nervous. First, about ending DEI, because you've got entire arts organizations that have, basically embedded it into their missions and into their values.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like, okay, we're not going to be able to get any federal grants. That cuts out a big slice of support. But then you go, well, is it going to shake down to, is the state arts board going to say you can't do any grants that are basically DEI because we get money from the feds?
Yeah.
I have to say I thank the state of Minnesota and the voters of Minnesota over and over again for the legacy amendment. That pile of money is separate from and not beholden to the feds.
Yeah.
And it has made a great difference in this state and in the arts.
For the environment as well, too.
For the environment as well, yeah.
And then you've got the Kennedy Center, which Trump is now in charge of.
Right.
Oh, wow.
And,
right. He's chair of the board.
Chairman of the board.
Chairman of the board.
But it's not all bad. I mean, now Lee Greenwood gets a chance to perform there. That's never would have happened before.
No, you're right.
And of
You're
course
right on that.
there's opportunity because people who were scheduled to perform are canceling concerts, abandoning ship, being told, no, you're too gay. It's just.
Oh, the whole thing. No, he wanted to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America.
Yeah.
But he has no power over that, does he?
Except that, like,
Not at
all these news organizations said, "Oh, yes, sir, we'll do that." I mean, what
Except
the
for
hell?
AP.
Yeah, except for AP.
And he said, you can't come to news conferences anymore.
Well,
And that's great
but
because
wait.
he doesn't have any news conferences. All he talks about is himself. They ask him a question, he doesn't answer it. He says, "And if it wasn't for me, we'd be at war right now."
We may be at war anyway soon.
Well, I
but
don't think so.
But in terms of the Gulf of America versus Gulf of Mexico, I love the response from the Mexican president when she said, she sent a letter to Google and said, "You can call it the Gulf of America for the first 200 miles. And after that, it's international waters and it's still the Gulf of Mexico."
Oh, man.
And by the way, if you persist in calling it the Gulf of America, we're going to sue your ass.
Good, I like that.
Well, a lot of people have sued him and won, but they never get any money.
Now, why is the media, not all of it, of course, but so enabling of this character and his troops?
Cowardice.
You think so?
Yeah.
Explain.
Well, they think that, and maybe rightly so, that he's going to pounce on them. He's going to do something horrible to them if they don't play ball. And it used to be when newspapers would say, "Well, F off," but not these days. I mean, the Washington Post caved. The Minneapolis, no, not the Minneapolis. I'm sorry, the
It's called
Minnesota
the Minnesota Star Tribune now. Yeah.
They caved. They caved right away.
Yeah.
Didn't wait, and L.A. Times, and a lot of it is because a lot of these newspapers are owned by hedge funds or foreign billionaires, so they don't see any reason not to go along with it.
One wonders what these current slate of television and print journalists and online journalists learned in J school. Are they being taught the right things?
This is an assumption that many of them went to J school.
Okay, I'm sorry about that.
Especially if we're talking about the alternate media,
Sure.
The internet-based media.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I got a job at the Wall Street Journal, I think, was because I did not go to journalism school. I mean, real serious
That was the
journalists.
criteria.
The people who go to journalism school, and really especially the ones who get their PhD in journalism, that's just a joke,
Yeah.
That's just ridiculous.
If you can't do it, you teach it.
Well, it's what I found in journalism was, those who can do, those who can't teach, and those who can't teach, they work on the copy desk, and they destroy every damn thing you've ever written.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's fine.
Oh, some
Well,
historic
Loren,
prejudice rises to the surface.
Well, you work with editors too, primarily.
Yeah.
The books you write.
Right,
So,
right.
So, are they helpful to you?
mostly, in general, editors, at least in terms of my experience with books, they have been helpful in that they've stayed out of the way. They've not wanted to.
It's all I ask.
They've not wanted to muck around too much. I mean, for the novel Circus Rex, the publisher, wanted a particular cover which was a little bit too Las Vegas for my taste.
Yeah.
And we argued about it for about 3 months, and then finally I went and commissioned to have a cover made, and said to him, "This is the cover." And he said, "Okay, fine."
Okay, so you got that in.
So I got
bought
that
that
in.
book. I loved it.
Oh, good.
Tell people what it's about.
Circus Rex is the fictionalized version of the In the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater's Circle of Water Circus Tour. So, in the novel, there's a ragtag circus that goes from the beginnings of the Mississippi River to New Orleans over the course of 6 months, with every kind of misadventure and disaster you could imagine along the way.
Well, it's a wonderful read. I hate that phrase, wonderful read, but it's really a good book.
It sounds a little bit like the Nathaniel West first novel, The Dream Life of Balso Snell. Seriously, it's
Okay.
kind of the same kind of concept. It's
I'm not familiar with that
well,
one.
very few people are.
Okay.
But that was his first book.
Okay.
And then he wrote A Cool Million. And then, of course, he wrote the classic Miss Lonely Hearts.
Right.
And then the one that most people, if they've read one of his books, the one they've probably read was The Day of the Locust.
Right.
And then he killed himself, had a car accident. So it hurts me,
Yeah.
because I'm a big Nathaniel West fan. There's like 8 of us.
Good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's going to happen to us over the next 2 years?
Well, hopefully we're going to manage to put a lot of humor into the tragedy. If you think about Shakespeare's plays, the only difference between the comedies and the tragedies is that the comedies, they're still alive at the end.
Yeah.
But
And unfortunately, in American life, it's a tragedy that a lot of people are still alive.
you said it. I'm not going to go there. But I mean, I understand that fascism in general has no sense of humor, and so one of the first means of resistance, one of the first ways of countering it, is by keeping your sense of humor and by finding, in the midst of this terrible, terrible tragedies, something to laugh about. It's a fundamental survival skill. So, I certainly, over the next 2 years, I will do whatever I can to support the opposition.
Mm-hmm.
So if it means on February 28th not buying, for the economic, day of abstinence, I can do that.
I'm looking to start a podcast. This is true, serious.
Okay. Yeah.
And the title I like is it goes like this: I've seen the enemy, and it ain't us.
It's like Pogo,
Or a
riff,
variation
a
on
riff,
Pogo,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
where they said, "We've seen the enemy,
And it
they
is us."
They
Yeah,
is us."
yeah,
Right.
I'm saying it ain't us. No,
Yeah,
I mean,
good.
I would have said the typical Jew or Catholic or from any religion that makes you feel like you're doing something terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Like my mother's a classic example of this.
Okay.
I'm like 12 years old, and I'm over at my uncle's house, and I find the closet full of Playboy magazines. Right.
Yeah.
12 years old. I mean, it's very exciting.
Sure.
My mother comes down the stairs. She sees me reading the Playboy magazines. She doesn't say a thing. And when we get home, she says, "I just want you to know, the reason that your uncle has all those magazines is because he's a sex fiend."
Okay.
So, you're kind of made to feel guilty, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
now I think we need to shed that and realize it just ain't us.
And, those are stories you'll talk about on your podcast coming
Yeah,
up.
oh, absolutely.
Now you also do podcasting with Mike Zanzibar?
Bob Sansevier, yeah.
Bob Zanzibar,
Yeah.
the BS show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where can we get that?
Just Google Bob Sansevier podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that because people, when we were doing the morning show, and it was a real huge show.
That's on KQRS.
Yes, it was
Yeah,
at one
yeah,
time.
yeah.
The morning show was a big success, and but people couldn't necessarily figure out which one was which. Even though we all had very different voices. So sometimes, like I'd be at the racetrack where I worked for a while, 20 years, and people would come up to me and they'd say, "Hey, Bob," and I'd say, so I'd just play along.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, "Why the hell do you think you have the right to get up and talk to me? I'm tired of all you pricks coming up and wanting to talk to me." I don't know if it ever got back to Bob that people were going around talking about a horrible person he was, but I like to think so. Bob's a great guy.
Yeah. So I was working at this radio station early morning, and there was a little thing posted on the console that said, "If the lights go out, flip this switch and say, 'Are we still on the air?'" And the lights went out, and I flipped the switch, and I said, "Are we still on the air? If so, give me a call." And the phone rang, and it was a woman. Mm-hmm. And it was like, she said, "I listen to you every day." And it was kind of like, my God, okay, now I have a sense of obligation. And we had these, she would call and we would have these conversations. And she was actually, you want to talk about education, she was very much into civic education, because this was in the 60s. And she said, "You need to read Norman Mailer, you need to read," she would identify things that was politically liberal, things that she thought I would appreciate reading. And this went on and on for a long time, and I began more and more to focus on what would make this work for her, this show.
Yeah.
And then one day she called, she said, "Well, I'm not gonna be able to see you anymore or listen to you anymore, so I'm just calling to say goodbye, and tomorrow will be my last day." And so I agreed to play some jazz for her, some Miles Davis for her, for her last day. And about 2 weeks later, I saw a notice in the newspaper about a woman who had suffered from MS, who had committed suicide. And I put the two together, and it was pretty clear, that it was her. Mm. So,
come for the laughter, and you stay for the tears.
Yeah, that's it. But that was the real story that inspired your...
Right, that inspired the story in the book.
What's the name of the story in What Haunts Us?
I don't remember. Hey, there was a couple of stories ago.
Yeah, it was. But it was
That's a good one, though.
No, it is a good one, and I tell that one periodically. Yeah,
It's interesting, the connection. This is way off base, but the connection that especially people who are listening to radio, that they have with those of us behind the mic. I mean, they do kind of feel like they're part of the family. That's if they're really, some of them do. We had a woman call us. It was at the morning show, and a woman called us, and I don't know how we got on the subject, but she called us because she had cancer, and she had survived. She had a double mastectomy, and she said, but things are okay now. It's great. She said, my husband, he's been so great. He's been my side all these years, And he said, and she said, it's great, but there's one thing he really misses. And so, one of us, probably Tom Bernard, said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, "He misses the titty sex." Now, we're all like, nobody laughed, I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
But it really hit us deeply to know that she would share this with us, what we meant to this woman, because it didn't mean that much to us most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Should we wind this thing up, Mike?
I don't think I can stand any more wisdom.
We gotta, okay.
Yeah, so that's.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.